quite excited to be today talking to you about scaling engineering organizations for success. I would like this to be an interactive discussion, not only a presentation, so don't hesitate to ask me any questions as I go through the slides, and I will ensure that I'll get a good amount of time at the end to answer any additional questions or even discuss some of them. So first, let me tell you a bit about myself and how I got where I am right now. My name is again Gjorgji Gjeorgjievski, or Americanized Gjorgji Gjeorgjievski. I was born and raised in Skopje, which is the capital of Macedonia. I spent my youth there, grew up there, went to school there. And at the end of my high school years, I decided to apply for an exchange program to go and study in the US for 1 year. This is how I ended up at Deerfield Academy, which is a small private school in Massachusetts. And this was my first exposure to a foreign, in this case, American, which is quite diverse and international culture. This made me convince myself that the next right steps for me is to continue the education there. So I studied at Yale University, where I focused on computer science and electrical engineering. Since my youth, I was very interested in computers, starting with video games, internet, and then programming. So I really wanted to continue that route. As I graduated at Yale University, I joined Microsoft. So I moved to the Pacific Northwest in Seattle and joined Microsoft, where I spent a good decade, a bit more than a decade. And while I was at Microsoft, I started as an engineer, individual contributor, and later on moved into the management water. Throughout the transition, Microsoft was also doing drastic, both mental and actual shift in moving the philosophy of software being on-premise to moving the software in the cloud, either as a platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, or software as a service. So I was lucky enough to witness that evolution going from on-premise for a large company to completely in the cloud. In the meantime, I decided to expand my education and attended my master's degree in University of Washington, which is a very good program with Microsoft, where I was able to take night classes while still working and continue expanding my education. Around 3.5 years ago, I became really interested into Snowflake, which is a data cloud company. And I joined them initially an engineering manager, managing a small team, later on helping their organization scale quite a lot and becoming a director of engineering. I've been at Snowflake for 3.5 years, as I mentioned, and I work from the office in Bellevue, which is close to Seattle in Washington State. Outside of work, I live in Woodinville, which is another small city outside of the Seattle suburbs, with my wife, 3 kids, a cat and dog. And to be honest, I spend all the free time that I have with them. Outside of that, when I have some additional time, I love swimming. I spend my youth professionally swimming and representing Macedonia. I also love skiing, electronic music, and I'm a big foodie, love different kinds of foods. So this is a quick intro about myself. Let's talk about the discussion that I will talk about today. So at Snowflake, I was fortunate enough to witness a hyperscale of a small company, which was, and it is continuously growing at an unforeseen rate compared to any other software as a service companies before. For any growth like Snowflake has been experiencing, that growth in revenue and customers is fueled by the growth of the engineering team. The engineering team is the team that is building, is the muscle behind the product, building a product, expanding it, adding additional functionalities. And it's really, really critical to grow and scale the organization, the engineering team and organization very effectively, keeping the bar high in order to continue fueling the growth as a company, of a company as a Snowflake. So in order to do that, there are multiple things that I want to cover today. Number one, starting with culture. culture is one of the most critical things that I will talk about, drilling a bit and explain why culture is critical for scaling a company. Followed by hiring. Hiring is what enables the spaceship to continue running and continue flying. The other aspect is talent growth, which is growing the individuals, engineers, product support that we already have and scaling through them, enabling them to deliver success and through them delivering broader success. The fourth thing is product, which is there's no company without product, and how scaling the processes around the building the product enables scaling a company. The fifth thing is ownership, taking initiative, understanding what the gaps are, owning it, and driving a change, always striving for an improvement. And all of this correlate with the last point that I will discuss today, which is success. Continuously striving to get things done and deliver success. None of this will matter if there's no success at the end, and thus success is really critical at each of these points. So having that said, I will start drilling in each of these topics. And again, if there are any questions, don't hesitate to ask me as I go. Culture is everything. So you probably have heard this and you keep on hearing this phrase. Yes, it is an overused phrase, but I cannot emphasize it enough how critical it is. Culture defines who we are. Culture defines what we do, how we do it, how we approach things, how we look at things. Culture attracts others, including engineers, including company employees, but also customers. Culture also can sometimes help others realize that the company or the product might not be a good fit for them. So culture is something that stands at the core of any growing company or any established company. So what does this mean? Number one, in order to describe your culture, at the core of it, you need to identify your core values. What are the top 3, 5, 7, 10 things that you will need to do on regular basis, live and breathe by them in order to continue explaining your culture and continue thriving. So this is really critical in the early stages of any company. And it's not only of the early stages, but as the company evolves, as the company grows, sometimes the values might also evolve and grow. I saw this at Microsoft, whereas the company was moving to the cloud, its values completely changed. And at Snowflake, I've also seen it how defining some of the core values upfront and sticking to them also helps drive focus and innovation and vision. So after defining and identifying the core values, we really need to clearly articulate them. And this is really critical because articulating means explaining what the values mean and how they correlate to your product or company life. This is critical because other than if we don't do this effectively, the core values will just be words, and usually these are generic words. For example, putting customer first. What would this mean, putting customer first? Unless you clearly explain that putting customer first means understanding your customer, listening to their needs, and working with them to come up with solutions that enable them to succeed, you may mean other things. You might mean, okay, do anything whether the customer asks, which might not be actually putting customers first. It might be not even helping the customers. Thinking big, for example, another core value that companies use. What does this mean? Thinking big sometimes might be innovating, thinking big. But if you don't articulate, it also means that putting those innovation into action, giving them into the customer hand, working with customers to iterate over those big and bold ideas in order to drive the technology at the cutting edge, it will lose really the intent of that core value. So after you clearly articulate them, and this is a continuous process, continue referring to them, continue reminding what they mean. The other very important aspect is to live by your values. And what does this mean? Always refer to them in any kind of difficult moment, in any decision-making process, and use them as a guide to help you decide. For example, if you have a dilemma whether to focus on a feature X or feature Y, reflect on your values and help the decision-making process by using them. If a feature X, let's say, is introducing a novel technology, but feature Y is focusing on a problem that customers are facing today, in this case, putting customer first to address their problem first might make sense, but also thinking big, maybe a bit later can help tackle the second priority. Highlight all of these values. Use examples, positive examples as part of your team meetings, company meetings, all hands, to highlight how various employees of your company, of the engineering team, have put the values in action, how they have used them for their decision-making to deliver success, whether this means customer wins, removing project blockers, bringing more clarity, etc. And at the end, use the values to measure success. As part of your ongoing people calibration discussions, or as part of your evaluation of success processes, incorporate your values. Try to use them as metrics to see, in addition to all the responsibilities and commitments that employees have had, how they've used and lived by the values, and reward them based on their reflection to the values. So just to wrap up, culture is everything, overuse phase, but it's really, really critical to define and live by your culture. The next aspect that I would like to discuss is hiring, and this is relevant to the culture because the culture and the values set the hiring bar. But at one point, we as a growing company will need to ensure that we can hire effectively, hold the cultural values, hold the bar, and enable the company to scale well. Myself, I experienced quite of hiring exercises at Microsoft as we're moving towards the cloud culture and growing organizations. But when I joined Snowflake around 3.5 years ago, I really was hands-on and spending a large portion of my time hiring. As a company that was scaling, doubling pretty much every year and a half or two, hiring was a very critical process. So what I will do now is I will go through some of my takeaways and learnings and things to be very aware of when doing hiring. So one of the critical aspects when starting from scratch or even starting small is starting with the key anchor roles and build around them. Why is this important? If you start, let's say, with junior engineers and you scale, you hire a number of engineers, but you don't have the architecture roadmap set, you don't have at least some of the fundamental processes, it's going to be really difficult to enable them to be effective until you find those anchor roles. Versus the way around, if you start with the anchor roles, let's say you start with some of the critical leadership roles, manager directors, and then you accompany them with some of the critical technical roles like architects, PMs, and technical project managers. Then those individuals can start focusing on some of the longer term aspects like defining the vision, defining the core processes. And then you can start focusing on hiring the supporting role around them, building around them. So it's really critical to start with these anchor roles. The next step will be to identify the key needs. Identify, in ideal world, what are the needs that a certain product will meet. This is really tied up to the vision and the product roadmap that I will talk about a bit later, but that process of defining the product roadmap will lead towards identifying the needs. And the needs can include, number one, type of employees that you need. Is it engineers, product managers, support, and also their expected experience and competencies. Do you need a senior engineer with experience on UX, or you need a senior project manager who has an experience of running 300 people projects. So this will really help you understand what you're looking for, and will really help you understand defining clearly what an ideal candidate can look like. That will be a very helpful tool in the rest of the process. After you have identified the key needs, establish sourcing and recruiting operations. And this is a process that takes time, and it evolves as the company grows. You cannot really grow a company without establishing an efficient sourcing and recruiting operations. This will mean very closely partnering with the recruiting side to establish how your company will go about sourcing. Will this be an activity that you have a dedicated person or a set of individuals who solely focus on sourcing, or an activity that every key stakeholder, which is hiring manager, recruiter, spends a certain amount of time sourcing? And sourcing is a very difficult exercise because the top of the funnel needs to be very broad in order to hire very few folks. For example, usually it takes 100, 200, 300 people, applicants, resume reviews in order to hire one person. So it's really extensive work for the outcome that is critical, but that is much more than the top of the funnel. In addition to sourcing, establishing the recruiting operation is also critical. The way it differentiates sourcing is recruiting. Sourcing focuses on finding the candidates. Recruiting focuses on driving the candidates from the point we believe that they could be a good fit to the point that we hire them at a company. Which means as part of the recruiting operations, we need to establish the appropriate roles, whether that's one set of recruiting, one kind of recruiting role, or multiple recruiting roles that drive the candidate through the whole experience. Interview process, closing, compensation discussions, and eventually bringing them to the company. As I mentioned, the recruiting operations is really tightly related to the hiring manager needs, and also their involvement and partnership with the recruiting team on what is needed. So as part of that, defining the key requirements for the role and the key requirements of the interview process is something that will bring a lot of clarity and help streamline these operations. For example, the key requirements of the interview process might mean that as part of every interview, let's say every engineering interview, we need to do at least 2 coding interviews and 1 system design interviews. It could also mean that defining the seniority of the interviewers that are participating in a certain interview. For example, if you are interviewing a senior engineer, a senior engineer candidate, the requirement of the interview process might be that there needs to be somebody who is more senior than them, so they can evaluate whether they satisfy the skills for their target level. So the requirements in the level. It can also mean some other requirements as part of the interview process, like in-person interaction or reference check after the interview loop is concluded. So why is very important to define and have set clear expectations of the interview process? The reason is that then you can simply roll it out and use it at scale. If the interview process is not defined, there are no key requirements. Every interview iteration will follow a different process, which will result into confusion, but most importantly, it will result into suboptimal candidate experience and will affect your ability to close the candidate and bring them to the company. Which brings me to the next point. Make sure that you hold strong and consistent bar, and both aspects are important and correlated. Strong bars is very important because as you hire for a company that is growing fast, there is a lot of pressure, both external and internal, to ensure that you fill out the positions such that you can bring the people and help the people as I mentioned earlier, fuel the rocket engine or help the people develop the product and move everything forward. However, unless you hold a strong bar in that hiring process, a bar that looks at your requirements, looks at your company values that I talked earlier, and you end up hiring a person who might not be a good fit, that will cost everybody involved quite a lot. It will not benefit the person who has joined the company and might be not a good fit. It will not benefit the company either. And at the end, it will not benefit you as a leader who is trying to scale an organization, because you will need to find an alternative person who will be able to fill up those shoes. The other aspect here that I mentioned is consistent bar. This is something that is not a challenge when the company is very small, but as the company grows, you not only hire for your team, but you hire for the company, which means that a person who joins your team 2-3 years after might work on a different product, on a different project within the company, on a different team within the company. And means that you need to, wherever they are, in which team they are, we still have the same company values that we look at. So it is critical to, as the company grows, to ensure that you establish processes that are at least serve as a guardrail of what are the key requirements that needs and what is the key bar across the company. For example, defining, putting together a document that explains what are the expectations of interviews at a different role or level. For example, a senior engineer should be able to design a complex system without much additional help from the interviewer. Could be such a requirement that can serve as a bar for senior engineers across the whole company. And the last part of hiring, and this is probably the key part and probably the most difficult and the most fulfilling part, is selling and closing the candidate. After you have found the right match, after you have found a candidate that goes through your whole interview process, does well, closing them and ensuring them they join is critical, because otherwise all of that time put goes to resets, and also you still need to find somebody who will fill out that role. So it's really critical to sell the company and the role at every opportunity that you have as a leader. Not only at the end after the candidate has passed the interview, but starting at the very first contact, whether that's the sourcer or recruiter touching base and asking them if they're interested, whether that is as part of the interview presentation or the communications between the interviews. Sell the company, represent yourself in the company in the best light as possible. Use your company values to ensure that they attract the candidate. And if you do that effectively, then the closing step at the end, after the candidate goes through the whole interview process, will actually be very simple, because by then the candidate has been sold and he believes that they will be a good fit for the company. So as I noted, hiring is a critical part of scaling organizations. Holding a strong hiring bar, consistent hiring metrics, hiring processes is very important to enable the organization to scale. And one last thing, always revisit, always have a conversation of what is going well, what is not going well, because as the company grows and as the company scales, some of the processes that worked very well 1 year ago might not be working at all now, because the scale that you're dealing is much different. So always revisiting how the hiring and recruiting operations are working. The next topic I wanted to talk about is still about growing the team, but this time we'll be focusing on growing the internal members of the organization or of the team. As I mentioned earlier, hiring is a critical aspect of growing. However, growing the folks and enabling them to do more, achieve their career goals, exceed their career goals, helps quite tremendously with growing the company needs.
Gjorgji, sorry to stop you. We have a question from one of the attendees going, how long was your recruiting process? And she goes on to ask, would you agree that if the company is not Microsoft or Snowflake, the interview process should be faster and a certain level of risk should be taken that will hurt the quality of hiring?
I would say the recruiting process, the length of the recruiting process has varied. I would say at larger companies, much longer. It takes more time, takes more conviction. In the early days of Snowflake, it was quite fast. At some point, as we were scaling, we were facing some scaling challenges. It slowed down, but then we realized that the end-to-end length of the recruiting process affects candidate experience. So we did a number of optimizations to ensure that the end-to-end process in recruiting doesn't take that long. In fact, if the candidate is ready to interview, we can get it finished within several days. The second question is, it's an interesting question. And my take here will be, sacrificing quality will hurt you regardless of how large or small the company is, even if the company is very small. If you hire somebody that you're not strongly convinced that they fulfill your needs, your requirements, they conform with your company values, it's going to hurt you both short-term and long-term. And the reason is, you will soon realize that what you needed for that role and hire somebody that doesn't satisfy those needs will not satisfy what you had to do. So soon enough, you will need to hire either additional people to fill up that gap, and potentially you may need to work with that individual to find an alternative position, or even manage them out if that's not working. So I would say quality in hiring, holding a high quality bar when hiring is critical, even if it takes much longer than hiring somebody that is subpar.
Okay, I hope that the answer was sufficient for our attendee. If not, feel free to type up again. Gjorgji, I'll jump in as soon as we have any questions, okay? Hope that's fine.
Yep, sounds good. That sounds great. And please don't hesitate to interrupt me, because this is a really good question. I would like to hear more of such.
Perfect. Please do go on if we don't have any questions.
Absolutely. So let's talk about talent growth. As I mentioned, this is probably as important, if not even more important than hiring. Based on just we discussed, hiring is really hard, and there is a lot of hit and misses. While you succeed many times, sometimes you may be convinced that somebody could be the perfect fit, but they may not end up doing. Versus growing the people that you already have, you already know their strengths, you know their growth areas. So growing the people, enabling them to succeed is probably as important, if not more, than hiring. So to start with, as the company is small, make sure that you define the right roles and responsibilities for the product team. For example, as I mentioned earlier, that can mean that engineers are developing the code. Support team is responsible for dealing with any kind of support issues that come into play. The PM or product management team is responsible for defining and justifying why the product should invest in some directions, and then work with engineering to execute on that. So defining of who is responsible for what and how these responsibilities and roles overlap or interact with each other is really critical, because it brings a lot of clarity on direction. As part of defining those roles, come up with clear expectations from each different role and each different level. You might have heard to this process referred to as the career ladder, which is a description of the different expectations, responsibilities of each different levels. This is important because every engineer, product manager, TPM from a specific level will clearly know what it takes for them to be successful in that role, and also will clearly know what it will take for them to grow into the next level or be promoted into the next level by looking at the expectations, responsibilities, and accountabilities. Having that said, just defining it and writing it in a document is not sufficient. Discussing how those expectations map to real life, to the project they're working on, to the project that they will be working on, will help them understand both their strengths but also their growth areas. And as a follow-up, work with every individual to develop their growth or career plan. Usually use at least several times a year as an opportunity to sit down, put all the disruptions aside, and focus on where each individual wants to go in the next 3 to 5 years, and then see whether your plans or what you had in your mind aligns with their ideal growth. If it does, sit down and then put together how would that growth look like in the next year, where you have a bit more visibility of what is going on, and what are some of the needs to keep in mind in the next 3 years. Maybe something that is not yet clear on where the product or the organization is going, but at least to have that in mind when a new big project comes into play. If your idea of where they're going versus where they want to go is not aligned, this will be a really good discussion, a good opportunity to sit down and align on that direction. That could mean that the specific individual might need a different project to work on, potentially a different role, or even work in a different organization within your company or even outside of the company. But understanding that alignment on career growth plan is critical, because that will enable you to have those healthy discussions and align what are the right next steps. If you don't ask, if you don't drive as a leader such discussions, some people will bring it, but usually there are some folks that are more introverted. There's some folks that are a bit maybe early in their career who might be hesitant to bring those discussions. So as a leader, it's really critical to work with every individual and explicitly encourage them and work with them to build that career growth plan. Always checkpoint and course correct as part of your regular rhythms, whether that's quarterly planning or twice a year people performance discussion, or even more frequently your one-on-ones, weekly or bi-weekly one-on-ones. Checkpoint how things are going and see, agree whether that's the intended direction, and based on that, if there's a need, course correct. And again, this doesn't need to be on regular basis, because there might not be an opportunity to course correct, or everything might be going well, but at least several times a year, make sure that you have an explicit conversation about that. These conversations sometimes might not be easy, because you might realize that you're on a completely different page with the individual you're discussing. But it's much better to have that conversation as soon as you realize that, and have a discussion about how you align, rather than not have it and realize 6 months after that the employee is leaving the company because they're very unhappy, or realize that the project that they've been working on is now much behind. So always bring difficult conversation whenever you realize it's something is not working well, or there is no alignment, and have that discussion. And at the end, what is really important, this kind of circle backs to deliver success, that I will talk about it at the end. Reward performance. People that are growing, that are delivering success, that are impacting the product and the company, rewarded accordingly. Rewarded based on the demonstrated impact, not on inertia. And in some cases, people that are delivering more results than others, unproportionally, their rewards should also unproportionally matched. So reward is not only a way to validate somebody's contribution, but it's also really a huge retention tool. After you have hired somebody and they're doing well, retaining them is much more better for everybody involved, you, the company, and themselves. So rewarding them accordingly, so such that compensation doesn't even come up or doesn't even become something they worry about, is something that that will help with the retention and growing the company further. So product is the other topic that is really critical for scaling. And when I say product, I mean defining and establishing processes around how we build a product. At the end, the product is the company. The success of the product defines the success of the company. Enabling is an engineering team or product team scales, putting the right processes in play to ensure that we can scale the product at least linearly, hopefully exponentially, is critical. So where do we start? Yeah,
so real quick, we have another question regarding the previous topic,
absolutely.
growth. The question is, who is responsible for conducting development or growth plans in Snowflake? Can you share a short example of such a growth plan, and what happens if the growth plan, let's say, is not followed?
Got it. So when I refer to a growth plan, I mean a bit about looking forward. So somebody's ensuring that somebody's career aspirations are met 3 to 5 years from now. The growth is for first and foremost responsibility on the individual. They are responsible for taking the right action to grow and ensuring that they have clarity of where and what they want to go, and they have the right path to go there. However, every engineering manager, every leader is responsible for enabling every individual to develop such a growth plan. You can think about the engineering manager or leader being a facilitator or supporter that works with the individual to understand where they want to go, and then helps them align their career growth aspirations with the business needs, with the skills required from their level. So a long answer to your question, the responsibility is to the individual, but the manager and the leader, including in some cases mentors, are key stakeholders in building those career plans. Regarding a specific example, I have an engineer who is at the middle of their career, and at this point, they love doing coding, they love building our product, but they're also very interested into management. They see themselves 5 years from now managing a small to medium-sized team. So I've been working with them to establish what it would take to get to that manager role 3 to 5 years from now. And this includes, number one, starting with some of the managerial responsibilities, starting to build the appropriate muscle and the appropriate skills. For example, mentoring an intern. Then as they build and develop the skills, the next aspect will be becoming a tech lead. So still technically being involved, but leading a project of several engineers. And while they're responsible for their code and their feature or product as part of being a tech lead, they will be also responsible to ensure that the engineers are aligned with the right opportunities. They will be responsible to ensure that they're tracking the product well. They're also they will be responsible to identify dependencies, blockers, and work with others to unblock the project as it's going. And afterwards, after they deliver success as a tech lead, we can start with a manager with letting them manage a small team such that they can continue building the managerial skills. So just to wrap it up, this is a good example, a little example that I've used of helping somebody develop a growth plan for the next 3 to 5 years. How do they get from their current IC role to a manager of a small or medium-sized team?
Perfect, Gjorgji. Thank you very much. Any other question, anyone? If there are, of course, feel free to jump in, and I'll cut Gjorgji off so that you don't have to. Gjorgji, please go ahead.
Absolutely. So product as I mentioned, developing the process around the product. The first is really developing a product vision. It affects hiring, as I talked earlier. It affects defining the roles and responsibilities. It affects what the company is. And the vision can be at different phases. Starting with 3 to 5 year vision really will help you realize what is the North Star, where you want to go. And then focusing on a bit more short term, focusing on what is the vision for the next year and what do you really want to build in the next year, which is more realistic, that will enable you go towards that product vision. This is a shared responsibility. It is a responsibility that's shared between architects, founders, leaders, managers, tech leads, product managers, TPMs. It varies. Usually for a product vision, it's a combination of the architects, founders, and some of the core engineering or product leaders. For product vision of a smaller teams, it involves all the different roles in the smaller team itself. After you have defined both long-term vision and yearly short-term vision, establish planning rhythms. Establish how do you plan, track, checkpoint, change course on executing on that yearly plan. And at Microsoft, we used to do it twice a year. At Snowflake, we do it on a quarterly basis, where every quarter we use the annual plan as a guide, but we do more granular planning exercise. What we want to achieve in that quarter, what are the specific goals, which means scope, timelines, what are the dependencies that we have as part of executing on that quarterly deliverable. And then prioritization across all of these different deliverables. Which brings me to the third point, which is prioritization and clarity on goals as part of your product vision, both long-term and short-term, is critical to enable you decide what you focus on. In reality, no matter how large or small your company is, having few priorities brings a lot of clarity and a lot of energy and focus on execution. So as part of your planning, yearly planning exercise, agreeing on either stack ranking or bucket ranking on what are the core priorities and what needs to be funded regardless of what else drops is something critical and is something that will guide you through the whole execution process. So after you've done planning, after you have realized, after you have settled on what are your commitments as part of your quarterly deliverables, what are your dependencies, we go into execution and tracking. And this can be done on multiple levels using multiple processes. Then there's need to do this on more frequent basis within the team, checkpointing, scrum meetings, different kind of techniques for tracking your work. But also there is a need to do this to kind of bubble up what is the status on different level of commitments, let's say the quarterly deliverables, on a high level. Maybe not as granular, but maybe on the project size. For example, if a certain project was to be delivered within the first half of the year, but it's behind, bubbling down with some frequency will be critical because it will notify any dependencies on that project so they can adjust their schedule or have a discussion about how we can accelerate potentially the project that is being delayed. It will also communicate with any other non-engineering or non-product stakeholders like sales, support, such that if there is a customer waiting on a certain capability, the expectations can be set up accordingly. So execution tracking can vary, but it's defining that and using it on a regular basis is critical part of building a product. The last point that I really want to call out is retrospective and learnings. Do this and do this often. As a company evolves, as a company scales, as I mentioned earlier, some of the processes that work well are not working. Number two, you might have introduced a new process that might need to be adjusted as well. So use the annual planning, use the long-term product vision planning use the quarterly planning exercises always as an opportunity to retrospect, learn from the past, and adjust your processes such that they are more efficient. This could mean introducing new processes. It could mean adjusting existing processes, but it could and should mean also sunsetting processes that were there and are no longer needed. It's a continuous process of coming up and modifying the processes to build a product, and it's critical to continue revisiting it. One of the last points I wanted to touch is ownership and initiative. As a company scales, the gaps also scale with the company, and not only the gaps scale with the company, but also additional new gaps show up. As a leader, as an employee, as an engineer or product manager or support engineer, always think big beyond your area of responsibility. This will help the company scale, the company be successful, but equally it will help you grow. It will help you expand the impact. Don't sacrifice your commitments, your responsibilities, but always think beyond what your team is doing, what your project is, because this will help you understand challenges that are there and enable you to identify gaps. When you realize such gaps, bubble them up, have a conversation with your peers, with your manager, with your leaders, with your CEO about those gaps, and use that as an opportunity to agree and understand what is their severity and importance. It might be a gap that you have identified that only affects you, but also it might be a gap that it affects many others. You were just not aware, or there was not an awareness of that. After you have done that, and let's say you have settled that yes, the gaps that you have identified is severe and important, take ownership. Yes, we're all busy. We all have responsibilities and accountabilities. Something will need to be dropped, but don't hesitate to have a discussion about picking up an effort that addresses a gap that you have identified that spans beyond your area of responsibility. Because this is really how it will help address these challenges as the company scales. Otherwise, if there's no initiative shown, and if there's no ownership taken, these gaps will continue expanding and eventually affecting the success of the company and of yourself. And at the end, after you take that ownership, be accountable for delivering what you have committed on. As I mentioned earlier, you would likely have different responsibilities, accountabilities, but never forget to look at the impact on the commitment that you have done and how solving a gap that spans across the company can result in much more high impact than anything else that you're doing. So be accountable for it, get it done, get it completed, or if you believe that you have found a better person, hand it off to somebody else. So everything I talked about ties with delivering success. And delivering success is substantial, because if you get everything to perfection, if you have the right processes, amazing hiring, you're growing everybody, but at the end you're not delivering success, which can mean many things: delivering the product, growing a company, increasing the customer adoption. All of that will fall in the water. So as part of every exercise, always strive to get things done. Always strive to drive things towards completions and explicit conclusions. Completion can mean finishing the product launch, but also a conclusion can mean explicitly agreeing with all stakeholders that the project that you've been working in the last 2 years might not be as impactful as you thought, and the right thing might be to stop that project and have the team focus on some other project. That's, even though you're stopping a project, that's in many cases delivering success. You're delivering success by not continuing to the project and rebalancing the team and resources to focus on something that is more critical. The other aspect of delivering success is, yeah.
I'm really sorry, we got a question.
Absolutely.
The question goes, how to stimulate employees to take more ownership, be more proactive, feel more empowered? Any tips and tricks around that? Anything you can think of?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say a few things. I would tie this with culture is everything, really. Define thinking big, innovating, taking initiative as one of your core values or as part of one of the core value, and then live by it. What does that mean, live by it? Use yourself as an example to take an initiative to solve such problem. Encourage others that to identify and take some initiatives. Highlight such examples of people that are doing that as a way to highlight how that cultural value of taking initiative outside of areas of responsibilities delivers success to the company or to the team and to the individual. And at the end, which is also what I have on this slide, reward success, whether that means compensation reward, whether it means some special annual reward you have to highlight how people are living by the value of taking ownership beyond their areas of responsibilities. So use these different dimensions of scaling a company as a way to reinforce the need, the opportunity, the impact, and reward occasions where somebody's taking ownership beyond their area of responsibility and solving a problem that spans beyond them. One more thing I wanted to call out about delivering success. There's also a psychological aspects of getting things done, driving towards explicit conclusion and delivering success. There is a psychological fulfillment when things are wrapped up. So the other aspects of delivering success is morale. If people are working 3 years on a project and they don't see where the project is going, they will burn out and they will leave the company, or they will retire, or they will stay very unhappy. If they work on a project and then that project gets finished, either it gets delivered to a customer, or there's an agreement that that project will be stopped and they will start working on something else, there will be the sense of conclusion, the sense of moving forward, the sense of learning as part of the experience and taking the next opportunity. So delivering success is also a huge morale tool to enable the employees, to enable them grow, and by doing that, enable the company to scale. And this is the last topic that I wanted to cover today. So as I promised you, I was expecting a bit more time, but we have some time for some questions that you may have. So who has the first question?
I think our audience is a bit shy, but I'll jump in with a question of my own, Gjorgji.
Sounds good.
You talked a bit about, let's say, it's a whole chain of events, right? From the hiring process to defining the culture and the values and all the other aspects. Now, out of all of the aspects that you numbered, can you pick one that is more important than the others? I know it's a basic, really basic question, but there must be something that stands out. For example, there must be some kind of a, let's say, I wouldn't say it a formula, but something that you see like, if this doesn't go to plan, all of the other plans would be somewhat redundant. What would
Good question and tough question, because I'm struggling to come up with. I would go to the first dimension that I talk about. And yes, culture is everything. It's an overused phrase. Defining the culture, living by it, will drive everything else. If the culture aspects are not clearly defined, articulated, if we don't live by it, if we don't hire, grow, build a product around it, take ownership, deliver success by it, things at one point will start getting off rails, and the company will start facing issues.
Okay, so in that aspect, as you said, company culture, right? So what do you think? Let's say a smaller company, let's say they don't have that much of a culture, right? They're not really defined, they're still growing. So what would you say are the most crucial elements in, let's say, creating that culture? Is it the people down below and giving them the freedom to express and drive on, let's say, the innovation and the expansion factor, or should the leadership, let's say, take more of a main role, let's say, steering the ship of sorts? Would you say that? So is it a top bottom
Yeah,
or a bottom up approach?
the most successful is both direction. And why? The leadership top-down approach can set kind of the guardrails, right? Let me use some examples from Snowflake. We clearly articulate our core values on our website, but I'm going to call out few. Integrity first, thinking big, putting customer first, building on top of each other differences, right? So the leadership defines those values and defines what is the meaning of them. For example, integrity. I talk about a few of them, but let me pick in this case integrity first. Be always direct and honest. But not only be direct and honest. Integrity first means also if something doesn't sound right, call it out, raise it right there on the spot. For example, if there is a decision made that where everybody's agreeing with it, and you believe that that decision is not the right one, have the conversation immediately there, right? So where the leadership can come into play in the top-down approach is lead by example. If there is a discussion where everybody agrees, but one of them does not, rise that disagreement at the point and have a conversation around it. So the other aspect is, in some cases, giving feedback. If you have any feedback and any observation, be direct. Go immediately to the person that you have feedback for. Don't go to their management chain. Don't just complain and sit down. Go and talk to the person and share that feedback directly with them. Right. So using the leadership to define these guardrails and lead by example enables bottom up, enables folks from engineers, new PMs, let's say, exercise this value and have the psychological safety to raise concerns when they believe there are concerns, to give direct feedback when they notice that there is direct feedback to be given.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. That was really, really nicely explained. Thank you. Anyone else, feel free to jump in. Oh, I have one question in the pipeline. It's related somewhat to this, and it says, can you please share a story or a use case, from scaling up an organization at Snowflake, a particular big challenge you faced and how did you overcome it? For example, a plastic example of sorts,
Yeah, got it. So, I talked about this a bit, but it was a long experience. Snowflake was hiring per teams, right? So every different team had their own processes on how they hire. I was involved in an effort whose goal was to unify the hiring requirements across. And the reason for that was the fact that every different team used different processes. There was no way to source at scale, to schedule interviews at scale, to approve offers at scale, to check that we are holding the right hiring bar at scale. So one of my core goals was to align with the 7 or 8 different large organizations that we have at Snowflake about what are the hiring requirements, starting with before interview panel, what are the different levels, expectations from the interview types, closing, what goes into the closing process, including compensation discussions, etc. So define it, aligned with other leaders across different organizations, which was quite hard because everybody is very passionate about hiring. It affects everybody's success. And then after we did all of that, communicate with every individual about what are those guidelines, what are those requirements. And again, ensure that you have the right guidelines, documentation, training in both in person and written. So this was a very difficult but very fulfilling experience, because right now you can think about, we have a template, and every time there is an open role, we put the template into place. The sourcing, recruiting team, The leadership team that approves the offer is very aware of the template, and we put a candidate through the pipeline of that template as they go. So it's much more easier to do that. And because of that, instead of being able to hire 10 people a month, we're able to hire 100 or 200 people a month.
Oh, thank you very much. We got another one. So what's up for you? What's coming up for you? What's coming up for Gjorgji? You know, what's up in store for you in the future? You talked about the 5-year plans. What's up for you? You know, future goals, personal goals, anything?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I worked at Microsoft, which was a huge company, right? I've been having a blast at Snowflake. I still believe that there's a lot of scaling ahead of us at Snowflake. To give you an insight, I started with a small team of around 4 or 5 engineers. Right now, my team is of around 70 engineers, spanning between Bellevue in Washington, San Mateo in California, and Berlin in Germany. I see myself in the next 3 to 5 years continuing that scale. Obviously, we're facing some macroeconomic situation, but inside Snowflake, we're extremely bullish on where we are right now and where we will be going after the macroeconomic situation starts settling down. We believe that there is another dimension of scaling in front of us, and myself, I'm quite excited to be put some of the learning experiences of scaling a small into medium company into scaling a medium company into a large company in the next 3 to 5 years. So that's ahead of us. That's something that makes me quite excited. And in the meantime, while we have this macroeconomic situation, we're still hiring. Obviously, we've slowed down the hiring, which is a good opportunity for us to focus on our talent growth, growing the people that we have, and ensuring that we have a very effective team.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that answer as well. Okay, so are there any other questions? Feel free to jump in the Q&A sessions, guys and women, girls. So. Okay, I think that's about it. Gjorgji, thank you very much for the amazing presentation, the amazing covering of the topic. I really enjoyed covering all of the aspects. Well, if anyone's up for starting a company, I think this presentation is pretty much all you need to know how to scale and all that. So Gjorgji, thank you. Thank you all for coming. And please don't forget to follow us on social media. Oh, sorry. You have a thank you note from one of our attendees. All the best. So thanks to everyone. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, all the social media, LinkedIn, and itlabs.com for some more exciting presentations like this one. Thank you, Gjorgji. Thanks, everyone, and see you next time.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure. And this is one perspective on how we scale companies. Would love also to hear from some of you how you have scaled companies or how you're going to do it in future. So thank you very much.